I think around 98, 99 was when I was first introduced to the whole genomics or the bioinformatics as it will be called. There was no Google at that time, so I found it fascinating that this was something that you could actually read your own software, if you will. And that was enough for me, because I think when curiosity is in your DNA, I think something as exciting as being able to read your own software was good enough for me to jump from physics to telecom to genomics. And I think that's when I first decided to come back to India and get started with my first venture called Ossimum Biosciences. I got started in this whole journey of entrepreneurship because my dad was a professor, and he was the kind of a curious professor who constantly brought us many different aspects of what science can do for you. So right from when I was a little kid, I think we were constantly taken to his lab. He was a physics professor, and I think the first thing when I dreamt when I was a kid, all the time, till I actually went to IIT, was I wanted to win the Nobel Prize, right? So there was always that excitement about doing something exciting in science, and I think that's where all of this started. And the fact that he put together the whole physics and genomics and all of that, I think, is also a connection that I also share. So I'd like to call this like, the journey across the genome, because in the end, I think, we all start somewhere and we are all connected in some form or the other. But to think about why I or any of the others who are sitting in this audience become entrepreneurs or otherwise, I think we start thinking about looking at how do we progress. And progress, I think, a nice quote by Khalil Gibran says that progress lies not in enhancing what is, but in advancing towards what will be. So I think that sort of brings us to a point where to say that why do we think about doing things that can really transform what can be done in the future? Today, if we want to think about, let's say, can we bring equality to everybody? Can we get better health for everyone? Can we think about something? I think with those thoughts in mind, with those ideas that are ingrained in us, I think is where we start thinking about how do we utilize some of that knowledge or others that so many other scientists, so many other people and innovators have done in the past to take us to where we are. So I just thought I'll talk a little bit about my journey as in becoming an entrepreneur. I grew up in a small campus town full of innovators, people who were constantly, from all over the country. There were people around me. And I think the biggest influence, of course, like I mentioned, was my dad, who would constantly bring us access to books, to lots of different toys and other things that sort of helped us becoming excited in science. So grew up over there, went to IIT Kharagpur, did physics. But I think around that time, I think there was a little bit of understanding that maybe what I thought about in the past was not what I wanted to be in the future. And around that time, I said, knowing yourself or discovering who you are is as important as saying that if I set a goal for myself, am I likely to take that to the next level? So I think I went to the US, did a master's in physics, but very quickly joined a company that was just starting off in telecom. So this was the early days of startups. This was still in the 90s. And at that point, I think there were lots of exciting ideas that we all were thinking about. And I think pretty much every other day, you would think about an idea, you would start working towards an interesting startup idea at that point of time. I don't think we called it startup then, but it was a company that you were thinking about. And very quickly, I think around 98, 99 was when I was first introduced to the whole genomics or the bioinformatics as it will be called. There was no Google at that time, so I found it fascinating that this was something that you could actually read your own software, if you will. And that was enough for me, because I think when curiosity is in your DNA, I think something as exciting as being able to read your own software was good enough for me to jump from physics to telecom to genomics. And I think that's when I first decided to come back to India and get started with my first venture called Ossimum Biosolutions. So Ossimum was more started, we started with doing software, we started doing a lot of genomics, sequencing software, microarray software and others, lab information technology. But very quickly, I think we looked upon opportunities that came our way. We ended up acquiring 3 companies, mostly outside of India. One was in the US called GeneLogic, one in Germany, and one in the Netherlands. So I think we were doing something that was very exciting. We became one of the largest genomics services players worldwide. But I think for me, there was something that was missing. And one of the things was that in the large databases that we were selling to pharma and biotech, the fact that most of those data points were non-Indian really bothered me. Because if you think about the future, and you think about how you were going to look at precision medicine, that every person is special, everybody's going to have medicine that's tailored to them, or you think about anything that you're looking at genomics, you're looking at how it's going to be working for them. If 1/6 of the world's population that is Indian is not represented, then we are going to not have the right kind of medicines for us. So I think for me, that was the reason to start Map My Genome. And that was around 2013 that I started Map My Genome. And it was, at that point of time, I think, an interesting time because not many people were, really aware that, genetics could be used for prevention. Not many people were thinking about, getting something to your doorstep. And so we launched this product, but there was a challenge, like how do you, when you talk to an average person and ask them, what do you think about genetics or genomics? So the only thing they could come up with was, you're trying to find out who the father or the mother is, or you're looking at a disorder. So I was thinking about how to present it to the average Indian consumer. And I think while sitting on a beach one day, I think what really struck me was that, there are maps for everything, right? You look at ways of being able to come up with mapping, financial planning, mapping for everything else. But we are not looking at something that is the first thing we should be looking at, which is our own health. So just like you have, Google Maps to tell you where to go from point A to point B, that if there's a congestion on one road, you take another. I think it's the same thing, that if you can think about something that will be like a map for a consumer, then it'll be easier for them to be able to then say, how do I actually take the next step? So we thought about a product which would be like a Janam Patri, because I think that's something that consumers understood. And so we created Genome Patri in 2013, and that's how we got started. Over the next few years, we added a lot of different products into our portfolio. But every time we started thinking, we realized that everything was growing organically, because you start with one product, you realize that people wanted more information around counseling, around genetic disorders also. They wanted information about how to do many other things when it comes to prevention and all of that. And so we added a lot more products, both in the preventive space, but also on the clinical space. COVID hit us all of a sudden, like it hit pretty much everyone else over here. And we said, we've been doing this for 20 years. We've been doing a lot of genomics. We have a lot of PCRs in our lab and so on. And I think that was an interesting time for us to reposition and also start being at the airport and other things. So I think this has been a constant learning journey that you, as an entrepreneur, we are constantly figuring out how to make use of the opportunity at the right time. And then now where we are is that we are looking at 2 specific areas of where we go towards. One is that we look at the area of wellness and longevity on the preventive side. And the other is the clinical side, where we are actually doing everything that you do from an exome and others. And so we make sure that we are looking at both the consumers and the clinicians. So when you think about when we start and do all of that, I think when we started Map My Genome, clearly I'd already been in the space for a very long time. It was already 12 years, which is long in terms of the genomic lifetime. There was a problem, like I mentioned, but I think the inspiration also came into the fact that there were also dark times during our journey as an entrepreneur. There were lots of mergers and acquisitions that were happening in the pharma space. So there were lots of external environment that was happening. There was also the fact that, in India, we are not looking at prevention as being the first thing. We all go to the doctor when we are really, really sick and end up spending crores and lakhs of rupees, but we don't think that we can actually have things that are in our control. So I think both failure, reflecting upon what went wrong in the others, but also thinking about what can be, I think was what really drove me to getting this company started. And that's, there were constantly lots of new challenges along the way. I wouldn't say the challenges stopped, but I think the first and foremost, like Professor Balram said, that what you export from an academic institution is the right people. I think that was always the harder part for anything in the science spaces when you're starting a venture. So getting the right talent in the beginning was the toughest part. We had to look overseas, we had to get people from outside. Today, I think I would say that we have a large number of talented people in the country, but in 2000 and 2013, that wasn't the case. The other challenge as an entrepreneur, and I'm sure pretty much everyone here, because you are in the biotech space, will probably face, is the cost and time for reagents and consumables. Because in genomics, we still depend a lot outside of India. There's regulation. So so for instance, right now, you can get NABL and a CAP certification, CAP accreditation and others which we have. But we also want to make sure that if there are things that are there, that regulation is a little bit, you think about well ahead of time, because it might come back to hit you as a retroactive law. The most important problem I think that we faced was that when you are looking at behavior change, both from a consumer perspective as well as a doctor perspective, because that's not what they were taught when they were studying medicine, or to consumers because they are emulating their families and what they see outside of them. I think that education was probably the most important part, that how do you educate doctors and other stakeholders to be able to get to where we wanted them to be. And the final thing I think was also that getting investment into industry which is still new is always difficult, especially in the biotech space and in areas where people don't really understand what it can actually do from a long-term perspective. So I think for a lot of people, we started saying that, are we thinking about DNA as being a destiny? Because that was the fear that a lot of people had, that if you find out that you have something in your DNA, then you're basically going to get it. And what I like about the whole One Health concept and others is that, when we think about what constitutes health and a disease also is that there is the genetics element, there's environment, and there's lifestyle. And while you cannot change what you were born with, there are many things that you can, which is the environment and your lifestyle. So I thought I'll put in a little quote over here by Chief Seattle that says that the earth does not belong to us, we belong to the earth. Because ultimately, I think when you look at the DNA composition of everything around us, whether it is a banana or whether it is a plant or whether it is a monkey or any other human being, we find that there is more commonality in us than not. So today, I think when we look at whether it is political differences, whether we look at other differences or climate change or anything else, I think we find that if you look at how connected we are, we can see that Plants, yeast, bananas are 50% common to us, chimpanzees and humans. And I think that should tell us that there are many things that we should look at, that our health is not just our health, but it's the health of everybody else as well. Now, this is the reason why I feel that what we do today as a community is important, because a large number of people are not aware that we can prevent many diseases just by taking a few lifestyle measures. And awareness about that problem can really solve that, can actually help all of us in getting to that point. So 80% of cardiovascular, 60% of diabetes, and 50% of cancers are preventable. And so if people were more aware, then the chances of people taking these necessary steps when they are much younger will be able to actually prevent diseases of the future. Now, I also wanted to bring back something that comes from Confucius, that says that if study the past, if you were to define the future. Right? So one of the things that I think is probably the most well-studied thing across on the genetic side is the study of ancestry, right? And while it might sound like something that is just for curiosity and for fun, I think there is a bigger purpose to it from a health perspective as well, if you are able to actually connect those dots. So I'd like to bring one of the books that talks, and I think is very well Googled also, is that most people Google who am I? And they want to understand who they are and where they come from. And that sort of gives you an information, on now that you have the genetics information, you can also start to understand where we have actually come from, what our genetic composition is, both in terms of from within India, from outside India, and so on. And I think that brings us to a little bit more clarity in terms of understanding that none of us are really different, because we all came from pretty much the same ancestor, and it's exciting to be able to study that. But when we think about health, knowledge of this information in terms of where we came from also helps us understand what kind of health problems might exist in a particular region or not, because their environment and their lifestyle were different compared to the rest of us. Now, I thought I'll also provoke a little bit of, where we all want to get to. Does anyone in this room want to live beyond 100? Okay, maybe not this room, but I've seen people who say they want to live to 120 and beyond. But I would say that, I'm not, if someone asked me, I would say that I'd be happy to live as healthy as I can till the day I die, and it can be any time, right? And I think making people live healthier in a time when they are there, whether they are 80, 90, 100 or so, is more important than saying an artificial number like I want to live up to 100, but be in a hospital and not be able to do the normal things that they want to do. So I wanted to just bring forth one interesting study that we did. We looked at people who were over 90 in India. And we took help of Professor Anil Gupta also. He was part of our study as well. And we found interesting things. One was that genes did have an effect. We found that there were some key genes, both in terms of cardiovascular and neurological diseases, that were affecting our longevity. But habits mattered a lot, right? Habits matter because you found that people who actually lived longer were probably eating either 2 meals a day, or were very clear about how they eat, when they eat, and so on. And the other interesting thing was that women were living longer, so gender made a difference, a positive difference. And they also found that shorter women and more stubborn women were living longer. So that was an interesting part that we found. And ultimately, when we think about, where are we going to get to in terms of the future of health, I think there are many things you have access to. And one of the things is that today we all have access to a lot of devices. Like I use a ring, a watch, a CGM, and other things. The question really is that, are the devices helping us live better, or are the devices helping us record better in terms of what we do? And one of the things I was telling someone yesterday was that I use this as data points because data ultimately helps us define something in the future, but the data doesn't tell me how I feel. And so it's important as a person who likes to do experiments that when we look at data, that we don't use data as something that is going to just define how we feel, but we use it to see, is that something that ultimately can help us get to better decision-making systems for the future, for a large number of people. So data integration, whether you want to look at, can you connect the dots between genetics, your blood biomarkers, a lot of the other gadgets that you might be using? Can we today get to a point where we can get better feedback? Can we get personalized nutrition or supplements? And will robotics change the whole treatment and assistance that we all will get to? So even now, I think I talk to people and I ask them, what do you think you can do with a genetic test, right? And I often tell them that while you can use it for understanding the root cause of disease, that is a very important part, you can understand it for finding out if certain medications work for you or not. But there are also ways to discover who you are. There are ways to be able to say, can you look better? Can you stay younger and healthier? And ultimately, I think that's something that allows people to be able to get to. So anyway, when you give a lot of people a lot of advice, people say, okay, fine, all that is good, then what happens? What do you do, right? What do you actually do when you have to do with genetics? So I think the first thing that is there is that we are all born with a set of genes, and that doesn't change. So you can at least understand how your body functions or how your body actually works, and that's your genetic test. But the other thing, and I think that's another interesting part of when you look at One Health or others, is that you are more than just human. You have a lot more microbes living in you than otherwise. So I think understanding that you are in coexistence with a lot of other microbes is a very important part of understanding where we are. And the third is, what is the effect of the lifestyle that you have undergone over the last many years that has actually changed your genome in a way, and can you actually measure that, right? So I think today you can measure a lot of the lifestyle interventions that you have taken with methylation, with telomere testing and others. But you can also realize that these are the things that your inherited genes don't change, your microbiome doesn't lie, because it tells you that you've been eating maybe sweets or things that you don't, and your epigenome carries your truth. So most of the time, I think also wanted to just say that you could take just a swab. It is done fairly simply. Today we are all at a point where you can actually get these tests to your home rather than you going to a center. So whether you are doing a genetic analysis or a microbiome or epigenetics or anything like that, all of these are done at home tests. So I won't go into all of these details unless someone really wants me to, but the reality is today you can actually get enough information about yourself that you can start taking the necessary preventive steps that you may want to today to be able to actually take those necessary steps so that you don't get. So for instance, I'm at a risk for type 2 diabetes or otherwise. Can I actually take those steps? My dad got it at 40. My grandfather passed away at 65. My dad passed away at 72. Today, can I do something that prevents? I think that is certainly there in my power. So I think that's what we want people to understand, that if you are aware and you're more, you know that you can do something, you are able to do it today rather than wait till you actually get to that point. So we use, since many of you are scientists over here, GWAS studies or polygenic risk scores to be able to do that. And we've done a lot of studies, and this is a recent study that we did, which was published in Nature on type 2 diabetes. So you can find out about which medicine works for you, what you can understand about your gut, and you can understand what kind of lifestyle you can read in your DNA what organs are aging, whether your heart is aging faster than your brain and lung and so on. So there's a lot of things that you can today understand, that you may be 55 or 56 years in terms of your chronological age, but you could still be much younger than otherwise. Like, I don't know what Professor Balram's age is, but he looks like he's 50. So there might be something in his biological age that you can probably understand over there. So ultimately, I think I want to say that, the power of DNA is in our hands. So if we can understand that, we can understand our long-term health. The last thing that we are currently doing is that we have been now connecting the dots between genetics, blood biomarkers, and other things, and we call that the gbio.me. And we're using machine learning to create these overall health scores for individuals. We've currently partnered with a company called Humanity so that we can put those pieces together. But the idea really is that, can we simplify this process for an average person so that they can know what to do next, instead of giving them too much information and so on. Like I mentioned, I think science is what drives all of this. And we always recognize that there are many things that many people have done before us. And I think we've also made sure that at least a little bit of that we contribute from Map My Genome, whether it is in terms of research by ourselves, whether being part of another group's research or so on. So we currently did that. We also created a large learning resource for people to be able to understand about any gene, anytime, and so on. So I hope that somewhere in this large knowledge base, we are able to help people understand all of that, because history repeats itself. And if we are not able to understand what we were able to do in the... So I think I'd like to end this with, history repeats itself, in part because the genome repeats itself, and the genome repeats itself in part because history repeats itself. So I think there is a lot of connection back and forth, both in terms of who we are as a species, who we are as people that we do, because everything is ultimately repeated. But if we can understand history, we can understand the future. Thank you.
To stay informed about the startup ecosystem, subscribe to My Startup TV.